to the Lounge with Travefy Academy, where we get to hear from travel industry voices and experts to learn more about their story and also what they see on the horizon for travel professionals. And I'm Stephanie Grice, and our guest today is Rick Rosenfeld, who is president of Journey Softly. So, welcome to the Lounge, Rick, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Stephanie. I'm really happy to be here with you.
Yes, same here. I know we have so much to talk about here today, and this is going to be a very timely episode. But before we jump into everything in there that we want to talk about, can you first just tell us more about yourself and just how you got started in the travel industry?
Sure. I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland, and I moved out to Chicago for college and never went home. I've lived here for about 40 years. I now live with my wife and my Cocker Spaniel. I have one college-age daughter who's out in Boston right now. And in terms of the background, by the second half of the 1990s, I was doing some management consulting. And by that point, I was already a world traveler. I love my vacations. I love my experiences overseas. And I found that I was having more fun helping my colleagues plan their vacations than I was helping insurance companies streamline their backroom operations and lay off employees. Just wasn't an inspiring line of work for me. So I decided to start my own travel business in 1999. And initially, I was a general service travel agency. I was happy for any $5 rental car commission that would come across the threshold. But within a few years, and by 2003, I had fully morphed into working with business schools, MBA programs. I had a brand that was called Travel MBA, and I worked with many of the top MBA schools in the United States, including Northwestern, University of Chicago, Yale, Duke, Harvard, and the list just kept growing. And what we would do would be to send academic groups overseas for cultural and business immersions. And that became my business niche. In 2009, I sold Travel MBA to a company called World Strides out of Virginia. And I stayed there 7 years with the acquiring company, where I really became focused on international risk management and client safety. And you can imagine, with tens of thousands of travelers every year, with an average age of the early to mid 20s, not always a good decision-making time in life. It was really important to have a point person to make sure that clients were safe and that there was someone there if they ran into trouble or needed help. In 2016, I left World Strides and I took a sidestep. I took a job running an international nonprofit focused on Palestinians and Israelis meeting each other for the first time and getting to know the enemy and learning that how much similarities they have actually in their lives until the pandemic changed everything. And at that point, I reflected and decided to come back into the travel industry. I rebooted my travel company, now called Journey Softly, this year, with the hope of helping clients safely return to international travel as we start to come out of the pandemic, which the Delta variant has caused a bit of delay with.
Yes, it has. And that's really cool. And we're big World Strides fans. World Strides, we've worked with them with Travefy. So that's really cool. And a quick question for you is, while working at World Strides, is there an example that you can give of a crisis you had to help with? I mean, I can imagine there were a lot of them, but are there any that come to mind?
Yeah, it was, there were crises, pretty much on a weekly or monthly basis during the peak travel season. One of the things that we did, just for background, is we had a matrix that we created with more than 20 categories and subcategories of different types of crises that we needed to prepare for. On the medical side, for example, we lived through SARS and H1N1 and MERS and Zika and Ebola. On the terror side, I had a group actually fly on 9/11 from Spain to Sweden. They arrived in Sweden just hours before the attacks, and then they got stranded for 10 days in Sweden before they were able to get home. Had groups in Paris during the Charlie Hebdo attacks. On the natural disaster side, multiple hurricanes in Central America that we had to deal with and manage. And I think the biggest challenge, and the one I would highlight, just to give an example of the breadth of things that need to be thought about, is we had two groups at World Strides in Japan in 2011 during the Fukushima earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear scare. And one group was leaving the following day, so they were okay. They just hung out overnight, went to the airport, and that was fine. But the other group was from Yale's business school, and they had just arrived the day before. And that was their first full day in the country. And they were actually 2 hours north of Tokyo, which is the direction of the earthquake, when the earthquake hit. So their 2 hour drive out turned into a 9 hour drive to get back. One of the bridges that they drove over on the way was gone. on the way back, so they had to reroute. And as a lot of top business school students are, they're pretty well connected. So while we thought initially we were going to keep them in Tokyo, one of the students got a message from a friend at the U.S. State Department, says, "Don't believe what you're hearing from the Tokyo or from the Japanese government in terms of the nuclear situation." And based on that, the school decided that they were going to evacuate folks. So it turned into a 3-day, 72-hour process to get people first from Tokyo by rail to Osaka in the western part of the country, which was further away from the earthquake and the nuclear situation, which we didn't know the full scope of then. And then the next day, we got them on flights to Seoul, Korea. I had my travel partner in Korea pick them up for a tour, and then we did a hotel overnight. And then we had flights back to the United States for them. So me and one of my colleagues, we managed this pretty much without sleep over a 72-hour period. And honestly, it's the thing I'm probably most proud of from a crisis management perspective. That became a case study at MBA conferences in terms of how to manage a crisis and how to deal with it. As other universities were talking about, how they basically just sat in Tokyo and didn't do anything for a period of time, and the backlash from that. So I think that's probably the most lasting moment that I can think of from a crisis management perspective.
Wow, that is just crazy. And I mean, we're going to talk about, the pandemic, and we know that's happening. We still don't know, what can come out of it. But, crises like that, I mean, you do not know when something's going to happen. So to
Mm-hmm.
always be on your toes and be ready. So, kind of with that being said, what are some of the top things right now, focusing on the pandemic, but also if, anything else arise? What are the things that travel advisors always need to think about when sending their clients abroad, especially just right now?
Yeah, I think with COVID, I mean, I think, first my assessment of where we are in middle of September with COVID. I do think the Delta variant you're going to start to see the numbers drop as you add the number of vaccinated people to the number of people who are recently getting COVID, who know about it, plus the number of people who are getting COVID that don't even know about it at this point. I think you're going to start seeing the levels drop, and that's consistent with what we're seeing in other countries. You're generally seeing a 2-month period from trough before a peak up until you really start to wane. And this started in July, so we've gone through July and August, and I think by the end of September you're going to start seeing numbers come down. It's not meaning that everything's going to be rosy, but I think we'll be in a better period than we are now. But we just don't know when the next variant's going to come, what that's going to look like, what the impact's going to be, whether it'll evade vaccines. There's just so much to know. So for travel professionals, you just have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and uncomfortable with the unknown, and try to prepare. And one of the things that I'm telling our clients right now is, let's think about planning trips for the future. If you're looking at something for 2022, let's not even put dates on it yet. Let's come up with the destination and come up with the outline of an itinerary that looks good for you. And then we'll put dates on it later, and let's have a plan B backup destination that we can plan as well. And if all goes well with your destination A, you'll have your destination B ready for 2023. So that's how we're kind of approaching it with our clients. But in terms of assessing things relative to the pandemic, I mean, there are some things that are really important to keep in mind. First, Stephanie, I strongly believe that unvaccinated adults should not be traveling, period. And I add to that list those that are severely immunocompromised. And that's a conversation between a traveler and their doctor to determine what the comfort level is for the individual person in terms of actually traveling. But I think families also need to be thoughtful and intentional about right now traveling with any children 11 and younger who aren't even able to get the vaccine. Even though the studies do show that they're less likely to get very sick, we're seeing plenty of cases where children are ending up in the hospital and some even dying. So I think parents have to keep that in mind. But I do think for most healthy, vaccinated adult, there's no greater risk of traveling internationally to many destinations when you compare it to destinations within the United States. I mean, realistically, if the State Department's going to list the majority of countries around the world as level 4, which is its highest level, we really need to acknowledge that almost all of the United States should be level 4 as well, just based on where we are. So 4 things I'm assessing personally in terms of international travel when I'm looking at clients. And the first 3 are straightforward, and the 4th requires a little more finesse. So The first one is how vaccinated is a destination? Now, the US is 54% right now and is very, very slow, moving forward very slowly due to the vaccine hesitancy and resistance. We've dropped from being a world leader to now being 41st as of today, with more countries surpassing us almost every day. Greece and Malaysia just passed the United States within the past couple of days. Switzerland and Japan will likely pass us within the next few days. So right now I'm using kind of 30% vaccination as my floor. There are 76 countries in the world that are 30% or greater in terms of vaccination percentage. If you want a higher threshold, there's 60 countries that are at 40% or more and 45 countries that are 50% or more. So there are plenty of countries out there that are in reasonably good shape in terms of vaccination. The second thing I'm looking at is the Delta variant and what that curve looks like. And recognizing, again, there may be more variants in the future and more waves in the future. It's important to see how the COVID trends are for a given country. So Japan, for example, they had a relatively small first and second wave in 2020 and early 2021, but they had a national reckoning right before the Olympics when the Delta surge hit Japan. And Delta actually peaked at around 25,000 daily cases in Japan just 3 weeks ago. But now Japan's already back down below 10,000 cases a day. So within 3 weeks, they went from 25,000 a day to 10,000 a day. So you have to look at the curves like that for a given country. The third thing that's really important, and I don't think a lot of people do, is to look at medical care in a given country. So what happens if a traveler gets COVID? How good is the medical care going to be? Now, there's a website called World Population Review, and they have a segment on it for healthcare. And they rank 100 countries. So it's not every country in the world, but they rank 100 countries on the quality of medical care, which also factors in access and affordability. Now, overall, the United States ranks 37th, and that's primarily due to cost of care and access. But the top 50 countries are all comfortable bets in terms of sending clients. So that's a World Population Review. And by the way, on the vaccination percentages and the COVID numbers, I use a mixture of Johns Hopkins University and Worldometers in terms of getting my data from there. The fourth one, which I said is going to be tougher, what are the rules for entry and exit due to COVID, and how likely are they to change? So let me give you a couple of examples. Costa Rica, for example, has been allowing US travelers since the spring and has been unwavering regardless of COVID trends there or here. So you feel pretty good if you're wanting to go to Costa Rica that the rules aren't going to change. That's going to impact your ability to get there, experience travel there, and get home because they haven't changed so far, and there have been a lot of things that could have caused them to change. But on the flip side, you look at a country like Israel. Israel's changed its rules multiple times, making it really harder to predict or assess what the reality is going to be and when it's time to travel to Israel. So I kind of look at that, and those are the harder ones. There's no single resource to use, and you know that when I look at what those rules are, that includes both testing and also quarantine. So I have to have frank conversations with my clients, every client, about what happens if you go overseas and if you test positive before you return. What is that going to mean, and can you afford to spend the additional time in that country and be delayed coming back? So those are all important conversations to have with clients.
Yeah, there's so much to think about. And that's really great tips in there. Just looking at, what was it like currently, how there could be a country right now that looks really bad with the numbers. But then if you just take a look at it a few weeks later and it's starting to drop, you can see, maybe it will be okay. And yeah, and all the countries just, constantly changing. Like, for example, I just saw France the other day, how now they're letting, if you're vaccinated for Americans, and I don't know if that's the first country doing that I've heard of, or a large country doing that, but are you seeing things just constantly changing? And do you expect that to just keep going for quite a while?
Yeah, I think some countries are going to, be very frequent in terms of their changes, and others not so much. I mean, Europe, the EU just allowed Americans to travel in the summer, and they basically saved their summer travel season, at least in terms of the large number of Americans that like to go. That really helped them. But just a couple of weeks ago, they added the United States back to a high risk list, which they should. But every EU country is responsible for creating its own rules around it. So while some countries are requiring quarantine now for any US person coming in, vaccinated or unvaccinated, there are others that are creating different rules for different if you're vaccinated. So I was just looking at Germany for a client today and got confirmation from Germany that if you are vaccinated, even if you're from a high risk country like the United States, you do not need to quarantine. But if you're unvaccinated, or if you're coming from a country that is identified as being having variants originate there, which is pretty much just southern part of Africa right now, you do have to quarantine on arrival. So the US is okay into Germany right now, but you have to look at every country. And then on the flip side, look at what the United States is doing. The United States has set their travel protocols and they haven't moved them. So while Canada and the UK and the EU are now allowing Americans to travel, it's not reciprocal. So if you're Canadian or British or from the EU, you can't come to the United States, even though COVID is relatively, compared to a lot of other regions, relatively stable. But if you look at some areas that have spikes, like I had a traveler scheduled for Thailand who had to cancel because of a spike there. Thailand became like the Asian epicenter for a while, but the U.S. had prior to that allowed Thais to come to the United States, and they didn't change that rule either. So you're like, well, you would think Canadians should be able to come and Thais no, but no, the U.S. has been very firm and set. But hopefully they're going to change the rules in the next few weeks for Europeans and Canadians.
Yeah, it's just so wild, so crazy how they're all just so different. And what can travel advisors do to protect themselves and clients? Because that's another part of this that's, everybody understands. Some people might not really understand. So how can you make sure that, or as a travel advisor, they can protect themselves?
Yeah, I want to let's talk about protecting the clients first, and we'll talk about protecting the travel advisors. I think for clients, one thing you need to do is once you book a trip, is you need to then proactively monitor news from the destination you're sending the clients. Don't always count on the clients to do it for themselves. And if you're a good travel advisor, you are constantly feeding information to your clients about the destination, not just when you're booking the trip and when they're traveling, but in between that book and travel period. Also, travel advisors should be booking travel insurance that includes cancel for any reason or CFAR coverage. That's usually required to book the CFAR coverage within 15 to 21 days after the initial deposit for a trip. That will protect, in most cases, like 75% of the client's investment if they have to cancel due to a change in COVID rules and regulations, or if they get afraid and decide they are too afraid to travel. So that insurance is essential. I personally use Travel Safe, but Travel Guard, Alliance, and other providers also do a very good job. The third thing is to monitor cancellation deadlines, so you have top of mind when penalties kick in. And if you know when penalties kick in, then you can set a go no go deadline with your client to make a decision. That's also depend on how flexible they are. So the clients I have scheduled to go to Germany in December, they will be retired. They don't have any reason they have to get back. They've got a fully reusable airline ticket, and the hotels, their first penalty is until 3 days before they depart. So they really could go until a week before travel before really making a go no go decision on this trip without incurring any penalties. Next thing is to partner with a company like Travefy, so you can push information to your clients during their trip with any new information that's relevant and helpful to them. That's very important. Make sure the clients know and are prepared for the US testing requirements, that they have to show a negative COVID test before they return home. Kits that you can pack and take with you are available through all the major airline sites. So keep that in mind and have them travel with that and know how to make that work. And then right before the clients leave, I think the last thing that the travel professional should be doing for their clients is make sure that they are enrolled in the Smart Travel Enrollment Program with the Department of State. And you can access that through step.state.gov. and you go to that site, you register your client, and if there are any updates from the embassy or the consulate where they are traveling, whether it's COVID related or natural disaster or some political rally that they need to be aware of to avoid, they will get emails proactively from the US government. And that way also, if something happens, the US government knows that they're in country and they know how to reach them and where they're going to be. So it works both ways to the benefit of the traveler and the benefit of the US government if help is needed. For the agencies, protecting yourself, first, waiver forms. Especially right now, but I think in general, you should have a specific waiver form for a client who declines travel insurance. If the client's like, yeah, I'm willing to take the risk, you don't want to be in a position of he said, she said when they get back, or if when they cancel a trip, they're like, oh, I was never told I should get travel insurance. So make sure you have a specific waiver that they initial sign saying, yes, I've been told that I should have travel insurance and I am waiving that. The other good thing is that actually that the fact that there is a waiver like that may actually tip the scales and get them to buy the insurance if they're on the fence. The second, also specific for right now, is a waiver that specifically acknowledges that you, the travel professional, have explained COVID risks, rules for travel, reentry requirements, that you're not liable for delays due to COVID, that you're not liable for expenses due to quarantine or something that might occur overseas. You know, it's kind of the equivalent of the small print thing that you click through when you're on a website, but this is something that you want the clients to acknowledge that you have shared with them. And the third, I think every travel company should have general terms and conditions in terms of refunds, and that isn't COVID related. So those three things I think are important for agencies to protect themselves. And then finally, I do think this is both for the clients and for the agencies. Make sure when your travelers are traveling that they have a way to reach you 24/7. I know it's not fun getting a call in the middle of the night here when it's daytime someplace else, but having a clients know that you are available to them to help 24/7 if they have an issue. That's great. For me, the way that we work with our partners overseas, you know, they have my phone number, but they also have frontline numbers for their guides and for our partners in whatever country they're traveling in. So you know, that really reduces the number of overnight calls that I've gotten because they tend to reach out to people in the same time zone first.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's so many great steps to take and resources. So thank you for all of that. And
Mhm.
what also, and you've kind of touched on this already, but how can advisors best be prepared for changes and how can they stay on top of the different country guidelines?
Yeah, I think that, you know, there are some regular resources for travel professionals, like the trade publications, like Travel Weekly is the one I rely on the most, which pushes information out on a regular basis. American Society of Travel Agents does that as well. There's so many different news sources out there. And now, you know, through social media, there's so many social media sites that are focused on travel that you can follow. So I think just stay in tune with what's out there. But I'm going to recommend something I think a lot of people don't know about, and it's a lesser known area of the State Department called OSAC, the Overseas Security Advisory Council. That's OSAC. You can find them at osac.gov. And basically, this is a partnership between the US government and the private sector, not just the travel industry, but all different sectors of business that exists to help keep information flowing and keep travelers safe. And I've been involved with them for many, many years. And they provide quality research, and that's easy to access with country specific information right from their homepage. So basically, you can go to the homepage. There are a couple of different paths you can go down, but then you can type in the country you're looking for, and you can get information that's not proprietary, that's easily available, but it's well sourced and well organized. And they do a very good job. If you want to take it to the next level, you can sign up for a login on their website. Any American is allowed to do it as long as you're not selling their services or saying that you are an official partner of theirs, which you can't say. But you can get a login and then you can do more detailed research. You have access to their regional experts with questions and things like that. So really, really wonderful organization.
Awesome. That's great. Man, I might have to tell everybody before they listen to this to have a notepad ready to keep notes.
Good.
'Cause
Glad for that.
Yes, so many great resources. But just a kind of a different question for you is right now you talked about some of the travel that your clients are doing, but are there any countries right now that are currently your top ones that you would recommend sending travelers to? So if someone comes to you and they're like, I want to go to Europe or I want to go here, or I'll go anywhere, what are the places you're
Yeah.
recommending?
Yeah, and Stephanie, I think my focus is more on further afield. So I'm not a specialist in beach destinations. I think people have been really good and figured out that they can book beach destinations online. So I don't have a lot of advice when it comes to like Caribbean or Mexico. But I'm going to talk about broader areas. But I'm really going to go back to what I said before. You know, you really need to work with your clients and then use the tools to understand where they want to go to. If somebody wants to go anywhere, there really aren't that many people who say send me anywhere. You can make suggestions for them. But what I'd like to do instead, if I can, is just go through a number of examples to show how I use the data that I talked about earlier to guide whether it's the country that I want to send people to or don't send people to. And I'm going to choose some countries from different regions. So let's start with the easiest one, Canada, now open for Americans. It's 69% vaccinated. So remember, we're at 54 for the United States. I remember when the US was at 40% and Canada was at 4%, to show you how much the United States has slowed down and how much other countries have sped up. So 69%, they're likely coming out of their Delta spike in the next few weeks. They seem to be, their spike's not as big as the United States is, but it looks to be curving at around the same time. So I think they're coming out of that. They're number 30 on the healthcare list compared to 37 for the United States. And their rules are not likely to change. And they just started allowing Americans recently. And I don't see, if they were going to go back on that, it would have happened a couple of weeks ago when Delta was really surging here. So I think Canada is a good and relatively easy destination to go to. Let's talk about Germany. We talked about that a little bit. And we'll use that as a proxy for the EU, but recognize not every country in the EU is doing it the same way. Germany's at 62% vaccinated. They are coming out of their Delta spike, 25 on the healthcare list, and their rules changed in August. Again, if you're vaccinated, you do not need to be quarantined. I don't think it's likely that their rules are going to change again after they just changed in August. So I feel good about the EU countries that have not set up quarantines for Americans. Let's go a little exotic. Let's look at Morocco. 45% vaccinated. That's still well within my threshold. They're already out of their Delta spike. So they're now on a trough. 29 on the healthcare chart. And they are only allowing, and this is interesting, they're only allowing vaccinated individuals to enter big cities. So if you're Moroccan and you're not vaccinated and you're the 55% that's not vaccinated, you can't go from Marrakesh to Casablanca if you're Moroccan. And if you weren't vaccinated as an American, you couldn't do that either. But the vaccine card is your gateway to be able to travel around Morocco. But note, Morocco has a 9 p.m. curfew. So if that's important to you and you're like, oh, I'm going to be out after 9 p.m., then maybe not Morocco. But if you want to see the sights during the day and have a relaxing dinner and go back to your hotel room, Morocco is in a good place right now. Let's look at Chile, because Chile sounds like it would be wonderful to go to. 73% vaccinated. The last spike was in June. There are only like 400 daily cases now with a country with a sizable population. 33 in healthcare, but you can't go if you're a US citizen because they will require you to apply for a waiver. And if you get a waiver, you have to quarantine for 7 days when you arrive. So they're really they're being very strict in terms of keeping, it's not just Americans, most people out of coming to Chile. And that's maybe why their numbers are so low at only 400 a day now. But if you like this hemisphere and you want something that's Spanish speaking, we'll talk about Costa Rica. Now, Costa Rica on the more challenging side, 30% vaccinated. That's my low floor. So if you're like, it seems low to me, maybe not. But if you're okay with that, 30% vaccinated, their COVID is steady. It's been at a moderate level, but they've not had a real spike. It's just been steady. 36 on healthcare, and their rules are lenient and predictable. They've been open to Americans since the spring. No sign that regardless of what happens here, that they're going to change. So if you're looking for a destination that's like nearby, Spanish speaking, not likely to change the rules, Costa Rica is a really good bet on that front.
Wow, there's so much to consider, even the curfews. so many things that you just wouldn't even think of, that every country just has their own rules. And no,
Mhm.
thank you so much again for all the stats and the numbers. And it's a very easy thing to look up too, which is really cool. So if
Mhm.
you're going to meet with a client and they have some options, easy to go look that up and say, well, here's, and just sound really educated about,
Mhm.
this is what you could be getting into or why this would be a good place to go. So that is awesome. And one quick thing too, where can people find more information about you if they have any questions or want to reach out?
Sure. If folks can find me through the website, which is journeysoftly.com. We have a blog there as well. Also on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So yeah, feel free to look me up and reach out.
Awesome. That is great. And those were the questions I had. But before I wrap up, though, I just want to make sure, because again, I mean, we could do a series on this every week with things just always changing. So, is there anything that I'm missing or anything else that you'd like to add to this episode?
No, I think it's been great. I think you hit all the key points, and I think you're right. I mean, if we came back and did this in a month, it'd probably be the same general stuff. But if you look at the specifics, we would be able to talk about where the curve is for different countries, what the rules are that are applicable at that time, how many countries are now above a comfort level, and maybe my 30% floor on vaccines changes to a 40% floor on vaccines as we have more time.
Yeah, I mean, it really could always change, but now we know all the resources to go to keep up with those changes as they're coming. But I just want to thank you so much again for taking the time out to chat about this topic. I mean, it's probably the most important one about travel right now, easily to say. So thank you so much, and thanks everyone for tuning into this episode of the Lounge with Travefy Academy. And thank you once again to our special guest Rick for joining us here today. Now, be sure to subscribe to our podcast or subscribe to our YouTube channel for all of the latest episodes. And we hope you enjoyed our conversation today and join us again. But for now, stay safe and we'll catch you on the next flight.